copyright that song. It's so good. It's gonna be the next hit, I'm sure. So what we're talking about right now is formants. Yeah, right? Super excited. My glasses are crooked, and I don't know how to fix them. Anyway, formants. Booyah! So I talked a bit about sound waves and how formants are created essentially, that they're peaks of energy in the harmonic spectrum, but essentially they're the resonances of the filter from the sound source. So essentially your vocal folds, if they're modeled by string resonance, the vocal tract is modeled by the resonance of an open-closed tube, or closed-open tube. Sometimes you see it either way. You can Google that if you want. The resonances of an open-closed tube, closed-open, what else? Anyway, so certain harmonics are going to be strengthened. They're going to be given a little amplitude boost. Those air molecules in that of those sound waves are going to be bumping into each other a little more. Okay, a little more compressed, a little more rarefacted. Okay, and then sorry, got some stuff in my throat starting to come up. And certain harmonics will be dampened a little bit. So you know, essentially those little molecules, as they're bouncing around, they're just going to be like doing a tiny little jig, you know, like, no big deal over here. And they're going to be shushed by the filter. So, formants tend to come for vocal tract. They tend to be numbered. So there's formant, there's F1, F2, F3, F4, F5 tend to be what you hear about a lot. In vocal pedagogy and with voice teachers and on blogs, so many blogs, like a bajillion blogs, right? And also in speech science, if you ever look into like Journal of Acoustical Society of America, like they have tons of articles on formants and such. Journal of Voice tend to talk more about the sound source. They tend to talk about the voice, but they do talk about singer's formant as a thing. So let's talk about it, so that if you happen to be reading that kind of stuff, or you're trying to continue your education, or even just a singer who's trying to get a grip on some of this stuff so that you can kind of maintain your own voice while you're on the road or something, or you know, you don't have a teacher right now and you just kind of want to play around with stuff on your own, let's talk about it a little bit. So help kind of clear out, hopefully, some of the mystery. So formants 1 and 2 are most strongly associated with vowels, with a listener being able to hear and understand the vowel you're saying. So when I go E, okay, or versus oo, okay, you're hearing two different vowels. And the biggest difference that we see in the acoustics, in the acoustic spectrum of those vowels, is that with the E, the first formant is low, the pitch of it is low, okay, the clump of harmonics there, they're lower harmonics that are strengthened on that first formant. And then on an E, the second formant is actually pretty high. It's higher than any of the other vowel second formants. So first and second formant, super far apart from each other. That gives you the sound of an E. And an oo has also a low first formant. So the first formant's still low, but the second formant is also very low. So they're the closest they are, actually. And they're pretty low in the register. Funny enough, when people have high frequency hearing loss, a lot of times hearing the difference between an oo, E and an oo become a real problem. Which sounds odd if you don't have hearing loss, because the two vowels sound so terribly different to you. But if you do have hearing loss in that upper frequency, you can't hear the second formant very well, and so you really can't tell when that second formant is high versus low, which is why they might hear it wrong, unless they see, like if you're doing oo and E, that's a visual. They'll probably get it from there. But, you know, if you're like trying to tell them something across the room, they might not hear the right word because, for example, they might not see you and they might not hear the vowel correctly. Oh. So there is that. The third formant, F3, is even higher, right? This is all going up in your harmonic spectrum. And F3 tends to be associated with being able to hear certain consonants correctly. It does relate somewhat to vowels sometimes, and all this stuff. So, but the main thing for singers tend to focus a lot on F1 and F2 because vowels are very important to singers, because vowels are the things like when you're learning another language, and you're trying to really sound Italian, or you're trying to really sound French, and you have to hold out that vowel that's not a vowel you normally use in your native language, and your vocal coach is like, not very clear, or Your E sounds a lot more like an or that's not a very good ah, right? Like how many times do we hear this? Your ah sounds too much like a schwa. Okay? So that, right? This is like vowels get really important for diction. It's really important for a singer to for their listeners to be able to understand them while they're singing. But singers have to contend with using higher frequencies, right? We tend to sing higher notes where the vowels, like especially sopranos, you end up in the land where vowels don't really exist, okay? Where the formant range where you would hear a difference in those vowels, this isn't really a thing anymore. Your first formant's too close to like your F5 essentially, and it's like you don't have a range anymore. No vowels essentially perceptually up there, like above the treble clef. And then you have tenors, poor tenors, where essentially they're singing with all the vowel space, right? Like their high notes are right smack where a lot of good vowels actually exist. And so they actually need to be understood. Not talking about like tenor high C, but like their tessitura, like where they tend to live, especially in Mozart and stuff. It's where women talk. Like it's where we talk all the time. So you need to have clear vowels, even though you're like in a really high fundamental frequency, and that's kind of tough, you know? Right? So you need clarity in your vowels. And so that's where you get into the idea of a lot of singers talk about pure vowels being a thing. It's a bit of a misnomer because there aren't really, like acoustically speaking, there's really no such thing as a pure vowel. But I think what a lot of singers are saying is they mean that there is like a pure vowel, what it sounds like to me anyway, when people say that. When singers, when vocal coaches, when voice teachers say pure vowels, what they mean is the vowel is very clear. You can tell if it's an ah versus an super clear to tell the difference, or an e versus an I, okay? They can hear a very clear difference, so they hear the correct vowel for the word very clearly. They hear a nice, consistent singer's formant, so they probably, if it's opera we're talking, they probably have an oscuro as well. They have that, they hear that lovely chiaroscuro target resonance for opera singers, and the vocal fold source is nice and clear and easily produced, okay? So essentially, what I think people mean by a pure vowel is like all the ducks are in a row. The vocal folds are vibrating nice and easy on that note. The tongue isn't overcompensating and muddying up the sound, right? You have that nice chiaroscuro, so you have the lowered larynx, that passively lowered larynx, which I talked about on lowering the larynx, that video. So passively lowered, it's not shoved down and made to sound weird. But you've taken a large inhale, you've got a passively lowered larynx, so you have that nice dark oscuro quality, and then you have that nice singer formant quality that tends to come more from the pharyngeal area, especially the epilaryngeal or supraglottal, depending on how you call it. That space right above your vocal folds tends to be where that tends to be strengthened, so you have that consistently, and then you have this nice clear vowel, like the person hearing you sing goes, yeah, that sounds like an actual ah, it doesn't sound like an it sounds like an actual ah to me. That's, I think, what people mean by pure vowel. So I think they use pure vowel as a metric, as like an auditory metric for if that singer is producing easy, clear, professionally viable sound with good diction. That's essentially what that means. It means, hey, you've got literally all your ducks in a row, opera singer, yay on you. But then as a singer, when you're told to make a pure vowel and you're not making a pure vowel, it gets really confusing. What the heck are you supposed to do, right? Like if, like, you know, ah has been my nemesis in my middle voice forever, right? Because so often if I'm over darkening, it sounds like an and if I'm over brightening, it sounds like an right? And it's like, where's my nice ah? Okay? Especially in mid voice. High notes, whatever. I can do an ah all day up there, but middle voice for coloratures, man. We don't like it. It's not our friend. It takes a long time to get a nice middle voice, and I still struggle with it. But essentially, yeah, it's that issue of if somebody says my ah isn't right, then I'm like, well, shoot, what's going wrong? Why do they hear an Is it my tongue? Am I being too dark? Am I being too bright? What should I do? Do I change my tongue position? Do I change my laryngeal position? Do I need to yawn more? Like, what do I do to make the vowel pure? Right? It becomes this big issue in your mind. So the main thing I think to take away from the idea of a pure vowel is it means, hey, your first and second formant have been put in a position such that the person perceives a true E versus an I, or a true ah versus an okay? They actually hear the vowel they want to hear on that word, okay? The coach or the singer or the voice teacher, they're hearing the right vowel, okay? So your first and second formant are in alignment. Yay! Woo! Okay? So first and second formant, way more about vowels than it is about singer's formant, vocal quality. Like, I personally have to think of those things as separate. They're a checkbox that I make in my mind that I think of as separate, because if I don't think of them as separate, I make it really hard on myself here. And vocal ease is my #1 metric for something is going wrong. If I have lost vocal ease, something is going wrong somewhere in my system while I'm singing. And I have to I have a little mental checklist of what I need to check off to see what's going wrong. And usually it's how I'm trying to create my sound. That's where I get into trouble, okay? So, F1 and F2, most often people tend to talk about tongue movement as relating to F1 and F2. You can create changes in your vocal tract and in vowels in different ways, in different positions. There is sort of that common position, like an E vowel tends to have, you know, the tongue tip here and the tongue blade there, you know, like you have different tongue positions for it. Oo tends to have, especially for opera singers, a nice rounded lip. For typical American speakers, it's oo. It's like, you know, there's no rounding, essentially. It's just oo. Yeah, for Jimmy Fallon, it's right? And so there's all those different ways of doing it. And, you know, really you have a lot of different options, actually, because it really has to do with where in the vocal tract a certain constriction is happening. That's what your tongue is doing. It's constricting the air column, and that's changing the resonances of your air column. So certain harmonics, low harmonics will be strengthened one way, and higher harmonics will be strengthened the other. So for an E vowel, the thought of the first and second formant, first formant being really low, is because you have a lot of pharyngeal space, essentially. You've made the pharynx very long right before that constriction, and the second formant's really high because the space right in front of the tongue is really small. So you've highlighted those harmonics. That's the idea of the tongue position. It's not exactly one-to-one, though. A lot of linguistics folks tend to talk about it as like one-to-one. Like if your tongue is here, your first formant is there, okay? And your second formant is there, okay? But that's a little bit of an oversimplification, because if you look at ventriloquists, they're producing clear vowels without moving their lips or their jaw. So a lot of times they're doing vowels and consonants in a different way. They're constricting in a slightly different place a lot of times to create clear vowels and clear consonants and clear speech, essentially, without the movement of their mouth. So there is different ways of doing it. But I think for singers on the whole, what I feel like is the bigger challenge with vowels for singers, especially classically, and even in belt too, is when you're up above where you normally talk, you kind of have to over-exaggerate your vowels a bit in order for someone to hear them as vowels at all, right? So if I'm like, yee, or yee, like if I go really high on it, like super yee, it's like suddenly I don't really have a lot of good sound if I go way too far with it, but I have to alter it a little bit, have to change it up a little bit. If I'm belting on an E, I have to actually really think of an E when I'm really up high because it sounds gross in my head, but E, you know, like the end of Popular, right? You'll be popular, just not quite as popular as me. I'm not getting the note right, but you know what I mean? So, you know, and you have to do like a real E instead of like, because what you want to do to sound good in your head is meh, and do more of like a meh, right? But it's like, well, that's not good diction. She's saying E, she's not saying meh. Okay, so then you have to work on that, you know, something to balance out. Singer's formant tends to be, it's usually thought of, let's move into that. So singer's formant tends to be, it's thought of around 3,000 hertz. Some are between 3,000 and 5,000 hertz, depending on the person. A lot of times for women, it's considered to be higher, like a 5,000 hertz or 4,000 hertz area. For men, it tends to be around 3,000 hertz. It's super important, like tenors talk about it all the time, but it's super important for opera singers in general because the orchestra tends to have a bit of a deficit harmonically around the 3,000 hertz range. So if you're singing and you want to carry over an orchestra, you want to exploit that deficit by making your voice, you want to give your harmonic spectrum a bit of a boost in that range in terms of energy. So you want a formant to be formed. You want a peak of energy around the 3,000 to 5,000 hertz range. You are not creating those harmonics. Those harmonics are coming from your vocal fold vibration, and they are there when you talk. They are there all the time, okay? Anytime you're creating voice, when you're just speaking, hanging out with your friends, you have energy there in that range of your voice. But strengthening that energy, well, that's a different matter. And that tends to be where like resonant voice technique and stuff for therapy tends to come out of that idea of you're dealing with, I talked about it a little bit in the larynx and laryngeal stuff, but you're dealing with the inertia of the supraglottic air column right above the vocal folds and the subglottic pressure right below the vocal folds and then the glottal pressures while they're in vibration. You're trying to balance out those things by kind of tweaking. Usually you don't know this is what you're doing, but you're essentially tweaking that supraglottal space. And I think a lot of singers tend to call it the epilaryngeal space, but it's the air space literally above the vocal folds, like right there, like between like the epiglottis and the vocal folds, you have this air space. And so remember with resonance, higher space, smaller spaces resonate at higher frequencies. So if you're talking 3,000 to 5,000 hertz, that's super high, okay? So you're talking a small space. You're not usually talking about the oral cavity or whatever. You're talking typically the ideal thought of place to create that sound is lower in the vocal tract. It's actually really close to the vocal folds. So trying to find the singer's formant is probably where a lot of singers can get really tight with their voice because that's where you're changing the relationship of subglottal to supraglottal air pressures, and that can change vocal fold vibration. And so that's probably where things get the muddiest, okay, when you're trying to learn how to sing. So straw phonation is a nice way to just get the feeling of what it's like when you have a nice balance there. That's a good technique to use. Any sort of semi-occluded, like ee or brrr, this stuff should all be easy stuff. You're looking for ease here. But when you get the right balance there, you get a ringy, pingy sound in the voice that belters like and opera singers use. The only main difference is opera singers like it when it comes along with the oscuro. They want the chiaro, the bright, the zingy singer's formant with oscuro. They want dark, okay? Because they're trying to boost it so much that they can carry over an orchestra without a microphone. That's the reason why. They just need to carry in the opera house. And so they need a really big boost of that singer's formant, and just over the centuries, the technique that's developed to do so has been essentially creating a lot of pharyngeal space, and probably, I don't know 100% sure, but I think maybe that passively lowering the larynx might allow for a little more constricting, actually, to get a little more fine control over that singer's formant and to really give it the boost it needs. But that's the chiaroscuro they're going for, and that's why they're going for that naturally lowered larynx. Belters tend to not need that super lowered larynx. They need a relaxed larynx, but they don't need to be super lower. But they still use the singer's formant as the zingy quality. It's like the buzzy, ringy, zing, 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 kind of stuff. That's the singer's formant that they're still going for. Same idea. So that might like blow your mind a little bit, but it is like a different vocal tract configuration though. For me, belting is a little easier, partly because I don't have any emotional attachment to it. It's just a thing I do. It wasn't what I trained in, so it's like kind of this fun thing I do, but also it feels like my vocal tract is a lot closer to my speaking resting position, so I can more easily bust into it. It's like I don't need to warm up as much. I just need to sing along with whatever I want to sing along with. Okay, I can just do it, yeah, 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 I can just do it, yeah, right? But if, I accidentally hit stop. But if I want to add on to that belty song, belty sound, or if I want to do classical, switch it to something more classical, Personally, I don't do classical very much anymore, so I need to warm up. I need to figure out what is the heck is that coordination again. Okay, so like I need to take a deep breath in and woo, 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 it's like I have to play and find where is that stable. And I like to do that using vowels and stuff. That's just my deal. Or straw or something like that. Or you know. I don't like to jump in with words right away and with changing things out because I want to feel like I can keep hold of that feeling of, okay, I have the passively lowered larynx. This stuff feels easy. It feels relaxed back there. But I'm finding my chiaroscuro. I personally like to think of my chiaroscuro being separate from my vowels. Just helps me a whole lot. So I'll use the vowel as a semi-occluded vocal tract tool. So I'll use like an to find that place where it's like, okay, I can release it a little more, get a little more oscuro into my sound while still having that chiaro there and feeling ease in the throat. And I like the E because it keeps my tongue root out of the business. So the root of the tongue, this is probably where singers get into the biggest problem. And the root of the tongue is the anterior wall of your pharynx. That's the problem with that darn root of the tongue. It is the front wall of your throat. Blech. So if it gets in the way, it can really muck things up. If I pull it way back and if I'm trying to make a dark sound using the root of my tongue, then I dampen my chiaro. I don't have a ring anymore. Right? Sounds like I'm singing through sort of like a sock or something, like something. It's like I've muffled my sound a bit using that root of the tongue, and my vowel's no longer clear because I can't get the tip of my tongue to a nice clean E. The tip of my tongue, the constriction of my tongue is a little too far back in my mouth now. Okay, so that's why the root of the tongue is such an issue. It's mucking up the air column, like the whole resistance relationship, and it's also mucking up the acoustic relationship that's really the ideal acoustic relationship. Okay? But that's the idea. So first and second formant, way more about vowels. So the idea of making a pure vowel and freeing up that E and is making sure the root of the tongue is not involved in your E vowel. You're not trying to make it dark and pretty. You're just trying to make an E. E, 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 and then go from there. Keep your tongue there and play around with when you take deep breaths in, relaxed, easy, large breath, when you play around with your vocal fold getting easier, so you're going lighter on the voice maybe, you're not pushing too much, you're not trying to make it loud. And you're playing around with that idea, and then maybe sirening on or something going from there, but you're playing around with it to try to see where do you find that happy spot of, okay, my eval's probably pretty clean. My first and second formants are probably okay because I got my E nice and, my tongue is in the nice E position and I'm not pulling it back in my mouth. And now I'm going to try to figure out where do I feel a lot of ease here in my throat, which usually for me, this is my thing, and I've noticed it in other students of mine too. Eval is where I push. That's where I want to get really loud here, and you can't. Like, if you try to get loud on an eval, you muck it up. Yee is like, it gets really hard on your throat. Same with belters. That's why that whole like me, when you're trying to do a pure E up there, you've got to actually be kind of light on it, because otherwise, you want to go to meh, because you want to like pound it, and you want to open up your mouth and really let yourself be loud, but you have to actually take take the gas off a little bit. Like you have to kind of, woo, slow that car down a little. Slow that the gas in the engine, slow it down a little bit, okay? So yeah. So like me. Like you have to just kind of go with it, or me. And one of my favorite teachers used to have me just sing the E, like the word easy on eval to remind me to be easy on the throat. Like easy feeling here. Easy, gonna be easy. Like you want to just keep it really, you're not driving it through the throat. So yeah, anyway. So I'm hoping that helps clarify a little bit with the pure vowels versus formants and stuff. The next thing to really talk about is the nasal part, the soft palate stuff. I think I'm going to save that for the next video. But essentially, what we're talking about next time is this air column, okay? This is the lateral, like, side view of your vocal tract. Your vocal folds, oh gosh, are going to be down here somewhere, essentially. Like, this is probably the that's probably the hyoid bone right there. And this little dude right here, back here, is the epiglottis, okay? And this is your pharynx right here, where a lot of the singer's formant stuff is going to happen. This is the airspace that is going to lengthen if your larynx lowers a little bit. So you'll have that oscuro, that dark. Oh gosh, this book is a little heavy. And then you have your soft palate right up here. This is your soft palate right there, okay? It closes off your nasal cavity, and there's some myths related to this that I would like to get at. So we're going to talk about that guy next time. But see, this is the root of your tongue back here next to your epiglottis. That's the guy that's getting in your way. If you're over-darkening, chances are good that root of the tongue is being pulled back, and it's feeling, oh, gross. So we'll get to that next time. I will see you then. Goodbye, everybody. Bye.